Hello. Uh, Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome in today's webinar. My name is Fationa Meidini. I'm a Global Initiative Coordinator for the Western Balkans, and I have the pleasure to moderate this event today. In the next 75 minutes, we are going to present an important publication that analyzes the illicit financial flows in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro and Serbia. The report came out 1 week ago, and it was largely covered in media and discussed among experts of this field. In fact, this is the second report that the Global Initiative publishes on illicit financial flows in the region. The first one was published in August 2020 and assessed the IFFs in Albania, Kosovo, and North Macedonia. Both these reports were produced with the financial help of GIZ as part of their project Combating Illicit Financial Flows, commissioned by German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and co-founded by the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. To analyze illicit flows in this region from the perspective of civil society is not an easy task. In a time when this subject is largely underreported and researched only by the state institutions and international organization bodies. The lack of data and often the reluctance of governments in collaborating make the independent research on the issue more challenging. For these reasons, we will have today the pleasure to introduce to you and listen more from the people behind the report, authors and local experts that have contributed to it. Please feel free to type your questions in the chat box, and I will make sure to address those to the panelists at the end of their presentations. Don't forget to also introduce yourself before posing any questions. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor now to the authors of the report, Robin Cartwright and Christina Ammerhauser, to present the key findings. Mr. Cartwright is Senior Fellow at the GI-TOC and was an Executive Director of the UK Government Investments, advising on governments. Before that, he was a partner in KPMG's global strategy team, where he developed skills to measure and counter illicit trade, recognized by World Customs Organization and the European Commission. On the other hand, Ms. Ammerhauser is an analyst of the GI initiative in the Global Initiative, conducting research on organized crime and corruption in the Western Balkans. She works on topics such as illicit financial flows, money laundering, and civil society resilience against organized crime and corruptions. Robin and Christina, the floor now is yours.
Thank you very much, Fationa. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. What we're going to do now is just give you a quick summary of some elements of the report. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in the published report than we're able to cover today. So we're just going to run you through some of the key findings about the issue of illicit financial flows in these three countries. So if you wouldn't mind, Claudio, putting the slides up so the participants can see that. That's lovely. Okay. Next slide, please. And just keep going to slide 4. Lovely. Okay. So illicit financial flows, we now know what they are. Illicit financial flows really are the ways in which value is extracted from an economy internationally in order, by people who are subverting, either through criminal or corrupt or tax means, subverting money away from its proper intention, whether that's to individuals or to the government or to businesses. So illicit financial flows have become a huge area of focus for example, the Sustainable Development Goals, where they're listed as a key part of the objectives for 2040 and beyond. And they've recently been better defined by the UN ODC and by UNCTAD, the Trade Department of the UN, as financial flows which are illicit in origin, transfer, or use. They represent an exchange of value, not just a financial transfer. They're over a period of time and they cross an international border. So this is a much more helpful definition than we've had before. But what the UN have said now is that we really need to look at these elements bottom up. So there are 3 main elements: corruption, illegal markets, and tax evasion and avoidance. And we need to look at those and calculate them bottom up. In the past, people have tried using macroeconomic estimates to find a very broad brush measure for IFFs. And a lot of those techniques have come into some disrepute over the years, although they certainly exposed how significant the world of illicit financial flows is, particularly in countries in Africa, say, developing areas. So thanks very much. Claudia, next slide, please. So following sort of the UN's advice, we took a bottom-up view and we made that assessment through a range of expert interviews. Bottom-up analysis of this type for this huge range of crimes and significant misdemeanors is really difficult because it's so vast. So every type of illicit trade is included, every type of corruption and every type of tax misdemeanor is in there. But we managed to talk to a huge range of people, as you can see from this, conducting, I think, 70 interviews in total across a very wide proportion of civil society actors, business people, and some real insight from former members or members of the administrations of all three countries in 2020. The next slide, please. Over to Christina, just to introduce the three.
Yeah, thank you very much, Robin. I just wanted to say hello as well. It's a pleasure to be here and present the report today. And we thought that at the beginning, before jumping into the discussion on IFFs in Bosnia, Montenegro, and Serbia, it would be good to highlight a couple of regional features to frame the discussion. Because the three countries that we've looked at are actually quite different. Their economies are quite different, with Serbia being almost 10 times bigger than Montenegro. Bosnia has a very important public sector. In fact, the budget of the public sector was estimated to be around 40% of national GDP. But despite the fact that these countries are very different, they also have a couple of common features worth highlighting, such as unemployment continues to be high, reaching from around 9% in Serbia to almost 17% in Bosnia. The purchasing power continues to be low, and all three countries have large informal economies between 25 and 30%. The economies are largely cash-based, and there's a high interconnectedness of the region, with people and goods flowing quite freely. The three countries lie along the Balkan route, which is a known route for drugs, migrants, and other illicit goods from the east to the west and vice versa. And just before I hand back to Robin, I also wanted to highlight two other points quickly. That's to mention that in all three countries, we found that state institutions' response to organized crime and corruption is quite fragmented, and the space of civil society dealing with these kind of topics is shrinking. Next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you. So we're going to move into the sort of key components of illicit financial flows, so starting with corruption. I should start by saying, we are all victims of corruption here in the UK. Not a day goes past without a story of what you might call soft corruption in terms of politicians having parties when they shouldn't do. So we are not trying to problematize these three economies by talking about corruption, but it remains true that it's a key vulnerability of economies that have large informal sectors, that they are more prone perhaps to corruption than those with smaller informal sectors. And all three economies here have quite significant informal sectors. Corruption is, of course, the abuse of entrusted power to private gain. That's what we're talking about here, and it can be in any form. It's such a vast topic, actually, that we focused down on three case studies. In Serbia, we talked and had some very fascinating interviews on infrastructure. Serbia has the biggest economy of the three, 50 billion, and they have an extraordinarily fast-growing series of infrastructure investments. But where it seems that the Serbian eyes are further to the east than they are to the west at the moment, there's a lot of Russian and Chinese projects in Serbia. And there is some reported talk about the loans for those projects being given by Russia and China in exchange for contracts on purchase and construction for the infrastructure. And this sounds, quite informal as an activity, not necessarily illegal, but people have reported that road spend in Serbia can be up to 30% higher when using these contractors not from local Serbian companies. So that's true in rail. We know that the Belgrade airport was sold for a very good price. That was actually a French purchase by Vinci. And so we remain sort of vigilant, need to be very vigilant about Serbian infrastructure. In Bosnia, we focus more on the non-governmental and civil society financing world as a case study. We know that that's not the only instance of corruption in Bosnia, but we have a huge CSO population in Bosnia, and many grants are awarded with a suspected political motive. There have been reports in Brico, one particular municipality, of officials giving, money to fictitious organizations. And there are also reports of the spend being completely outside the remit of public consultation in the case of 30 or 40% of the grants made. So given the size of the public sector and the scale of the different local and central government organizations within that complex structure, there is risk of corruption across that particular sector. Montenegro, we looked at one of the things that came up in Montenegro. It's the only area in the region to have been scored very high in terms of the Transparency International risk rating for defense industry. And we noticed there have been changes in the law in terms of foreign ownership of defense assets in Montenegro, which may have made that, it may have been more easy to enter into corrupt arrangements. So thanks. If we can move on to the next slide, please, Claudia.
I'll take over this one. Now turning to the illegal markets. A lot of research has already been done on the various forms of organized crime in the Western Balkans, but we have not found an estimate of the value of illicit proceeds. So we had a look more specifically at the profits made of the various types of organized crime, where and how are these illicit proceeds generated, and what proportion of these illicit proceeds are IFFs. We took the organized crime index of the global initiative and focused on selected key commodities passing through the region, most importantly, drugs, migrants, and illicit trade. So just to give you a couple of examples. When it comes to drugs, the Western Balkans remain a major region of transit for heroin and cannabis, and increasingly also for cocaine and synthetic drugs. Cannabis is produced in labs across the region. Synthetic drugs have also been found, production sites have also been found in Serbia. There's also a notable increase in the trafficking of cocaine through the ports of Southeastern Europe, including in Montenegro. And while the data on drug seizures alone is not enough to really estimate the value of a market, we coupled it in the report with estimates of the wholesale prices of drugs passing through the region and consumption prices available from previous research studies. We've also looked at the illicit trade, both at sort of the smuggling of legal and illegal goods. So that means also counterfeit goods, especially one focus was on the illicit tobacco trade, which is not only a trade, a transit trade through the region, but is also a key market for local consumption. We found a study conducted by the Zagreb Institute of Economics that more than 20% of people in Bosnia and Montenegro consume illegal tobacco. And this is partly explained by the high excise taxes, which are reported to push many consumers into the illicit tobacco market. To finalize this, I just quickly also wanted to talk about the smuggling of migrants through the region, which is a key market in the three countries. Migrant smuggled continued last year, also throughout COVID-19. And in fact, we think that increased border controls since the migrant crisis in 2015, but also to contain the virus, are likely to have pushed even more migrants into the hands of smugglers. There are two very important border crossings in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Serbia towards the EU. And there are estimates that the market at these two choke points alone are between 15 and 20 million in 2020. So back to you, Robin, and next slide, please.
Thanks, Christina. And the third form of illicit financial flows, the third category, is tax evasion. We haven't looked in detail at tax avoidance, which is seen as legal activity, but activity that is engaged in being creative about tax. This is more clearly illegal tax evasion. This is actual clear crime. And you can see significant values being lost from each of these economies every year. Often quoted as a percentage of GDP, around 2% of GDP in Serbia is lost every year, 450 million euros between 2013 and 2017. And a lot of this is a huge underreporting of salaries, huge prevalence across the region, particularly in Bosnia and Serbia, of salaries partly being paid in cash. In Bosnia, one individual, an accountant, a personal accountant we spoke to, talked about 50% of salaries are paid in cash, i.e. 50% of the value. And in Serbia, we looked at the case study of agricultural workers that report that come to the country each year, and 30% of the total of those are informal and informally employed. And even though the government has put quite a lot of effort into registering those employees, there's still a significant amount of cash-based employment activity. There is also underreporting of value at customs and corporate tax evasion, but we think one of the biggest drivers of this is basically employment taxation, underreporting and evasion. Thanks for that, Claudia. On to the next slide. So we're going to talk about the actual channels of illicit financial flows, and over to Christina to talk a little bit about the financial system.
Thanks. Yeah, so we've looked at the three components of IFFs, the underlying predicate crimes, and now we're looking more at the channels, the systems that IFF needs to flow through the system, the ways that money are moved. And there are three key channels that we looked at. The first is the financial system. We also looked at trade and cash. So when we're looking at the financial system, all three countries have significant domestic and international banking sectors. And so we found that the financial system is a key channel through which IFFs are moved. It includes banks, exchange offices, insurance brokers, microcredit institutions, to just name a couple of the main ones. In this section of the report, we also specifically focused on money laundering in the three countries. And we had quite similar findings to our first IFF's report, namely that money laundering takes place primarily through the construction and real estate industries. In fact, in Serbia, the real estate sector has grown at an unusual rate since 2018, with construction also continuing despite COVID-19, and although many of the newly constructed buildings remain empty. But we have an expert from Serbia on the call who is also going to tell us more about this later. When it comes to money laundering, we also looked at gambling and cash-intensive businesses and the role of the hospitality industry. We also looked at the role of cryptocurrencies, which was mentioned by many interviewees as a key risk and something that is important to watch out for on the way forward. The numbers when it comes to money laundering estimates are quite tricky. Here on the slide, you see the global estimates by the IMF, which suggest that 2 to 5% of GDP is laundered annually. And it also underlines the role of the banking sector to transfer funds between companies and individuals within the country, the region, and abroad. Next slide, please.
So talking about the trade system, one thing we know about the trade system is it is a significant channel of misinvoicing, of using trade-based money laundering techniques to extract money from an economy by misreporting what goods are coming and going themselves. And we've seen a potential rise in this. So the Financial Action Task Force talks about a switch away from the financial system in terms of as a conduit for money laundering, a switch towards trade as the financial system has massively improved its governance and its compliance, and the trade system is a softer target in that sense. So although information on this is pretty scarce, we know that there's significant misinvoicing, and this is where goods are under or over declared on the invoice in order to allow transfer of value. So for example, goods under invoiced are actually more valuable than the invoice states, and it's a way of moving money illegally without any taxation or tariffs for what are more expensive goods. We also see the use of phantom shipments, where invoices are created but no shipment corresponds with them, again to move money illegally because payments for the invoices can still be raised. We have a significant amount of trade into and out of each of these three countries, particularly Serbia, which has the biggest economy. And the free trade zones in Serbia are reported by the OECD to have lower compliance and lower governance over their activities than in other jurisdictions. So free trade zones always tend to be a significant area of focus. And there are 5 billion euros worth of turnover in Serbia alone. There are 14 free trade zones there. And in one particular case, they found goods that were of a value of €8.50 per unit being invoiced at 42 euro cents per unit. So that is the extent of that misinvoicing that you can see in terms of proportionally. Montenegro is also a focus for potential exploitation. The port of Bar will no doubt come up in the next report that Christina's involved in, looking at ports across the GI from the Vienna Observatory. But the specifics of that, again, are hard to pin down, but we're aware that there are significant cases, again, of misinvoicing of trade goods into and out of Bar. So thank you for that. If you can move on one, Claudia.
Thanks. And the final channel we looked at is cash, which includes the movement of hard currency, so banknotes and coins across the border. We found that it's often hidden in trucks or in hidden compartments of cars and transported across the border. And it's transported actually in different currencies: euros, local currencies, US dollars, and many others. Cash transfers above the threshold of 15,000 euros need to be declared in all three countries, but check at the borders focus usually on the smuggling of illicit goods, including drugs and cigarettes, rather than cash. It plays an important role, cash, also because of the large informal economies. Approximately 30% of all workers are hired in Bosnia and Herzegovina informally and are paid in cash, and it remains a main form of payment in the three countries. Another reason why cash payments are important is because they're often made via fast money transfer companies, where cash is deposited by one person and can be withdrawn within minutes by anybody somewhere else. And there's quite a high number of cash transfer companies across the region, including in smaller villages. And statistics that we received from fast money transfer companies also show the widespread use of those services, particularly to send money into the region. Next slide, please.
Moving on to conclusions. There's a lot to take away from a report like this because it's very far-reaching in terms of the level of crime and the sheer reach of different activities we try to get into. And one thing it shows us is that economies that are informal have vulnerabilities. It's a difficult issue in that we shouldn't sort of wish away informal economies because they are also highly inclusive, and informality is a big driver of entrepreneurialism, and it's a big driver of growth in many cases. But it does mean the use of cash is much higher, in those sorts of economies, and corruption and illicit financial flows are more likely to occur. We also think that corruption is a multi-layered issue. It's from bribing a traffic cop all the way up to undue influence at the very top of office. But we also looked a lot at the sort of soft power influence of countries like China and Russia, particularly with the Belt and Road Initiative being so heavily important to China as part of its east to west plans. So if you could switch slide, please, Claudia. And yeah, finally, one thing we would say as a takeaway is that we really struggled here to get a clear and coherent look at illicit financial flows. So there's a significant need to increase the quality of data on all these components. And that's not only from the financial system, that's on the trade channels, and that's on the cash channels as well. And all of those are underreporting in terms of the amount of information that civil society organizations like us can see. Serbia was given a low score in terms of money laundering investigations, and Bosnia was criticized by the Financial Action Task Force as having very basic financial services offerings, which heightened its vulnerability to more sophisticated financial sector illicit trade. So all of these things require more effort, both regionally and nationally, to address them. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Robin and Christina, for this presentation. I want to remind all our guests that you could pose questions to the authors and our panelists in the chat box. Some of you already are doing that, and we are going to have a Q&A session at the end of the presentations. As I also previously mentioned, we have the pleasure to have today with us also local experts on issues related to IFFs who have contributed to this report. They are going to speak about some of the most pressing issues in their countries concerning main components of illicit financial flows. Now, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Senad Ramadanovic. He's an independent expert from Bosnia and Herzegovina, and is going to speak about the lack of efficiency of the Bosnian judicial system in fighting grand corruption. Mr. Ramadanovic, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. My name is Senad Ramadanovic, and I currently live in Mostar, Bosnia and Herzegovina. In 2002, I returned from Dallas, Texas to Mostar and started working in IT industry. Today, I will be speaking about prosecution and justice system in Bosnia from personal experience, someone who reported corruption in the IT industry in Bosnia and Herzegovina. From 2007 to 2015, I was a sales manager for the biggest European company, software company, who has office headquarters in Belgrade and covering the West Balkans, Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, Albania, Macedonia, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Due to disagreement with the way of doing business in Bosnia and Herzegovina, I reported to the prosecutor office in Bosnia and Herzegovina and internal control of that international company corrupt actions that were committed on territory of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and which this international company was directly participating. The way how they did it is issuing the false certificates to its partners on the basis which public procurement law system in Bosnia and Herzegovina were divided. So that's one partner for neighborhood that in that period from 2011 until 2015 won 24 tenders of publishing 24. The value of those tenders in that period was over 30 million euros. This investigation is still going on, and I am still being called as a witness, but there's no results. In the meantime, I also failed the criminal complaint against the people from the prosecution who took my statements in 2015, because the complete documentation disappeared and nobody could find any traces of my report. So in 2018, I repeated my statement to another prosecutor. There have been writings by investigating journalists over those 7 years, but this international company has continued to work according to the old business plan and winning the tenders in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also in the region. This case is a case of high corruption and involves the largest state-owned entities of Federation of Bosnia and Herzegovina, but also on the same state level. But we know in Bosnia that prosecution didn't initiate any case of high corruption because it was allegedly agreed, according to deputy state prosecutors. Since 2015, I was fired and I had to close my private company. I couldn't get any new jobs anywhere, and where I worked, my contracts were terminated. My wife doesn't work, and my son who graduated from college doesn't work. So people who report corruption very quickly find themselves on the streets, and the state of neither plan or program to protect those people. That is why the people generally do not dare to report corruption in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because there is no results. The police may do some work, but prosecution and the courts will annihilate it all and will not convict anyone for corruption and organized crime. The prosecutor office and the courts are the biggest one in BIH in the fight against IFF and the similar in the region. Yesterday was published some report that Bosnia was in the bottom of Europe fighting against corruption together with Ukraine and Russia. In addition to ringing tenders of the public companies, there is a couple other channels that the main barriers in IFF in Bosnia and Herzegovina. They've been mentioned already by my colleagues. The first one is the financial system. It remains the key factor for the money laundering. Although the local banks are subordinaries of the international banks and subject to international money transfer standards. There is various forms of money laundering, and the most common are borrowing money from the Persian countries, because it's impossible to trace the source of money. It's estimated that the annual level of BIH between 2 to 5% of GDP falls on money laundering, which is 400 to 1 billion euros a year. This is huge money for this poor country. Banks, stock exchanges, insurance company, microcredits organization, and companies, they sell or buy real estate are the institution through which dirty money is most often and most invested in the legal flows. Next one is the corruption of BIH NGOs. It's about 25,000 civil society organizations registered in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and its estimate is 15,000 are active. There is about 1,300 NGOs that spent 64 million euros in 2007, but there's no visible results of that. Another way is to give grants to veterans organizations, most of which support ruling the parties. There were no visible results, and it's difficult to expect them if this way of distributing funds remains. And the last one, and probably the biggest one, is the cash payment. It's estimated as 50% of income taxes avoided through the case of payments because owners report workers to the minimum legal income. That's my story. So if you have any questions and anything, just please.
So thank you very much, Senadov, also for sharing your story with us. We have in fact one question, and I think that maybe you can just take very shortly the question before we carry on with other presentations. So is Elke Streng, and the question is directed to you. Was any reason for not considering to report the infractions to the SEC in the US? So
I spoke with the embassy in US because I'm a US citizen, and at that point when I get fired because of this, I spoke with the people in the embassy, and they told me that US government, it's not interested in this case because it's happening in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So why? I don't know, because this international company is published on the NASDAQ in the United States. So at that point, it's nobody is at the US Embassy was interested in this case.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, and probably we will have the chance to also have other questions and answer later on about Bosnia. With us today is also Dejan Milovac. Dejan is the director of MAN's Investigative Center in Montenegro, a center that deals with cases of high corruption and also organized crime. He personally has led very important investigations in the field of construction, energy, concessions, and also state asset management. So Dejan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fatjona. Thank Global Initiative for opportunity to share our story for Montenegro and to reflect on the findings from the report. Well, I was carefully listening to the story of Mr. Senad, and I could say that we have a fortunately similar situation in Montenegro when it comes to the role of state institutions in a front line, special prosecutor office, tax administration, and the police when it comes to fighting organized crime, which is in Montenegro one of the biggest sources for the illicit financial flows. So by that, I think that the track record in the past 10 or 15 years, but also the track record of the new government and the new police directorate. Let me remind you that in 2020, Montenegro experienced a historical change. So we changed power of Mr. Đukanović, the current president, that was lasting for 30 years, and everyone was actually looking forward to the new political will to fight organized crime and high-level corruption, to improve the track record of Montenegro, because for years, it will be nearly over 10 years that Montenegro is in the process of EU integrations, and continuously we have remarks of the European Commission that especially when it comes to organized crime and high-level corruption, the track record is not sufficient, and that fight against corruption and organized crime is not sustainable. With clear remark that special prosecutor office, but also the police directorate hasn't proven that it could actually lead efficient financial investigation, which brings to the fact that we still do not have enough results, sustainable results in Montenegro, that we could say that Montenegro is no longer a safe place to actually launder money. To what extent Montenegro was in the past decade or 2 decades a very lucrative playground for money launderers, it is very easy to see when you come to a holiday in Montenegro, when you go to the seaside, when you can see that, for example, construction industry was very lucrative, very approachable way for you to launder money, whether you are coming from the domestic organized crime group, but also organized crime groups that are coming from Russia and other countries with, let's say, less developed rule of law. And the money that was coming and flooding Montenegro coast showed that that Montenegro is capable of actually absorbing all of that money, and that financial investigations comparing to foreign direct investments in the real estate and in the construction industry are not sufficient to the extent that we could say that on an annual basis we have very successful financial investigations, that we have a lot of money which is actually confiscated or discovered as a so-called dirty money. When it comes to organized crime group, we might say that if you want to defeat organized crime group, you should take away their money. So unfortunately, I must repeat that Montenegro has profiled itself as a country which is, for you as an organized crime member, is the best place to be if you want to either hide your money or be processed for organized crime, because the track record of Montenegrin prosecution and judiciary is showing that, unfortunately, and that might come as a very, very funny thing to learn about Montenegro is that it doesn't pay off for Montenegrin taxpayers to fight organized crime or corruption, because we are ending up with investigations and the final verdicts that are for the largest cases, in cases of organized crime, trials are like by default ruled out in favor of organized crime groups. And that's several reasons for that. One of is definitely lack of capacity of the police and their financial investigation to properly collect evidence. And on the other side, we have this, like, let's call them like useful mistakes of the prosecutors or judges that were not able to prove the indictments. So in a couple of major cases in Montenegro, when we seized like 20 or 30 million of euros of the property and money of organized crime groups in Montenegro, we ended up in returning all of that property to these people and being sued for millions of euros in Montenegro because the trials and the overall investigation was not properly conducted. So in that sense, in Montenegro, we are still not experiencing, after nearly 2 years of the new government, we are not experiencing a true fight against corruption and organized crime due to the fact that we do not have reform judiciary and prosecution, and that current investigations are like quite similar to those that were led like 5 or 10 years ago. We do not have any kind of improvement or reform in that area. Last year and this year, the Montenegro made headlines again, international headlines, because of the large cocaine seizure in Podgorica, in Montenegro, the capital of Montenegro, when last year we have a seizure of 1.4 tons of cocaine, and this year, early in January, just after the new year, we had another seizure, which was half a ton of cocaine. And you might say that, it's a huge amount of cocaine for a small country like Montenegro is, but when you scratch down, below the headlines and all the political PR that politicians here are actually conducting, you can see that like by default, all of these investigations are not actually leading to the true owners of the cocaine. They're not leading to the organized crime chain, although our politicians tend to say that, we broke the organized crime, a scheme, and Montenegro is no longer a mafia state as very, very respectable institutions around the world used to call Montenegro. But at the end of the day, we are just dealing with consequences. We are dealing with, cocaine going through the borders of Montenegro, which is also important, of course, to stop and for those contrabands to be seized. But at the end of the day, we are not actually solving the problem that, if you are caught in Montenegro dealing with organized crime, it's much better for you to be processed here than, like in Serbia or Croatia or even some country with a less rule of law. And just one thing I would like to mention is, and it's also mentioned in the report, is the portal bar, which is, now more than ever is becoming visible, that is profiling as a port with a very, very, very high risk of actually smuggling and being used by the groups of organized crime. I was personally part of the report that will be published about sports in the Adric, but Montenegro, since the Croatia joined the European Union, become like the largest entry point for smuggling cocaine, cigarettes, and the government response. And I would not separate the previous government and the current government when it comes to that, was less than weak when it comes to the seizing cigarettes or stopping actually Porto Barov actually being so prone to corruption, so comfortable to for the organized crime groups to actually operate through it. What we have now as a public in Montenegro after change of the government are actually some efforts of the new government, the new tax authority, new custom authority, to make some kind of sense out of the free trade zone of Bar, because until now all the system that was established in that that free trade zone was like, written by the organized crime groups. Almost no, evidence or any kind of, security, and it was very, very easy for the organized crime group to smuggle pretty much anything through the portal bar. And that's something that must be actually changed in order for make a good foundation for the efficient, not just PR fight against organized crime, but actually true fight against organized crime and high-level corruption, which is producing sustainable results, but it's also dealing with the cause of all of that, the root of the problem, but not only the consequences. Sorry for talking maybe too long than I should. Sorry.
No, it's okay, Dan. In fact, you have also a question. It is posed by Ron Bunyaku from Pristina. And in fact, it says that, does Montenegro have a law on extended confiscation, similar to what is adopted in Kosovo in 2019? So very short.
Yeah, well, that's something that was, one of the key political promises back in 2020, but the current government and the parliament still didn't make it all the way to be adopted. There is a version that is adopted at the level of the government, but it still needs to go to the public hearing and to be adopted in the parliament. So we hope that this year we're going to have that law.
Dejan, another question is coming from Tena Prelec. She says, what is in your view the best way forward to strengthen the capacity of the prosecution, police and judiciary that you identify as the main stumbling blocks? Are there any open institutions at the moment, or do you think they are still all captured?
Well, I know that my picture is frequently, grim, and it doesn't leave much optimism when it comes to the police, prosecution, and the judiciary. It is very important to learn that after the change of the power back in 2020, we'll still, as a society, left with the unreformed judiciary and prosecution, and it will need some more time for us, to change the corrupted judges and the corrupted prosecutors. And when it comes to the police, I think that we in Montenegro had quite enough, trainings and, buying equipment, although, you cannot, be way too quick. But I think that the key solution to this problem and the key solution to the all corruptive public officer is the checks and balances approach, because we do not have a single judge or a prosecutor going to the all high-level police officer going into prison because of cooperating with organized crime, or failing an indictment, or intentionally rigging the judgment, which is going into the favor of organized crime group. So I think that when we manage to make example out of the responsibility which is needed for the prosecutors and judges, then we can actually expect for the things to move, because unfortunately in Montenegro, but I think that's the same thing for other Balkan countries, if we need to send message that if you are violating the law, you should go to prison, whether you are, an office clerk or a Supreme Court judge.
So the last question, I hope for Dejan,
okay.
at this moment is from Mariana Grasic. She asks, what happened to the cocaine smugglers and to their assets?
Well, for these two biggest seizures that we had, 1.4 tons last year and half of ton this year. Last year, we had the owner of the warehouse when the cocaine ended, which is imprisoned. And for this year, we had a person that was doing paperwork for the shipment, which is apprehended. So that's like the current limitation of the capacities of the prosecution to handle with this case. I just have to mention one thing, which is quite, I don't know whether it's entirely specific for Montenegro, but all the major seizures of cocaine and the cigarettes in Montenegro were made, during the transport. We never, as a country, or our intelligence coming from the National Security Agency or the police or a special prosecutor, we never apply a modus operandi that we follow the cargo, up to its, owner. We just like in this these 2 tons of cocaine, we made the seizure in the middle of the transport. So we were not really able to either know who sent the cocaine or who was intended to receive that. So, but it's not very unusual for Montenegrin dealing with organized crime is that, when it comes to the murderers, we all only, catch the assassins. We are not catching the ones that they are ordering the murder. So like in this case, we are only aprisioning so-called small time enablers, but not, the big fish.
Okay, thank you, Dejan. I have a little bit of pressure coming from the chat box about the questions. Don't worry, I will not forget any of the questions that you have already typed to the chat. But now I want to introduce Miroslava Milenovic. She is a forensic accounting expert with extensive experience in final investigations, has worked for many international organizations such UNODC, Council of Europe, OSCE, etc. And she's going to speak today about the trends of money laundering in Serbia. Miroslava, over to you.
Hello. One of the topics in this report was money laundering and the routes and the hotspots that we spotted in these three countries. But if you are a money launderer this time and you would like to launder the money, maybe the Serbia will be the perfect country for that. And statistics are going in that way. So the number of all reported cases related to money laundering in 2019 were, let's say, less than 0.06% of all reported cases. In the domain of prosecution, they are much closer to zero. And when we are talking about conviction, so convictions in money laundering cases for 2019 were around 0.02% of the total convictions for all crimes. So the number, even in the public, the perception is completely different. The question is why everyone is talking about money laundering and no one is prosecuted. So maybe because of the triangle of organized crime, corruption, and money laundering. So once more, just to mention that if organized crime exists, and in each of the crimes of the organized crime, corruption must be involved. If corruption is involved, then for sure we have a money laundering cases. But statistics in all Balkan countries, they're not showing that, because institutions are not in position to do their job, and they are captured in a state, that the state is captured in mafia hands. So even it's very low numbers related to conviction of money laundering, it seems like that has been unusual growth of in construction industry in Serbia, both residential and commercial. But however, sometimes these buildings or flats or apartments very often remain empty, which represents the red flag for money laundering. Also, there is equally unusual and very suspicious growth of the number of casinos, especially in Serbia and especially in Belgrade. There are streets that you can count, like a betting office, exchange office, and then a pharmacy, and then repeating this too. So, but I want also to mention the last but not least, the public and private donations to the political parties play a significant role in laundering the dubious money. So financing political campaign and other activities still remain a taboo topic in the society, especially that this year will be a year of elections in Serbia. So what are the main sectors in Serbia if we are talking about money laundering? So first of all, for sure, construction projects, real estate sector, but also infrastructure projects, exchange offices, in financial sector, but also sports sector and trade sector with over invoicing and under invoicing. So in generally there are two trends in used in money laundering in Serbia. Depends on the amount that it's in question. So we could say that there is a possibility that the money will be laundered locally, but that is only for the small amounts of money, and that the amount, if the amounts are bigger, let's say around 1 million euros, then the chain will be a little bit more complicated, and that chain will always involve like front men, but mainly lawyers or accountants or auditors or tax consultants, notaries, real estate agents, bankers, and so many other but top professionals. And they're always using complex schemes with numbers of non-resident accounts and offshore accounts, a number of different companies established in offshore, typical offshore destinations, and then with a non-resident account in the other financial sectors. Also, there are in this type of chains, it is notable that simulated legal transactions, and also that funds are transferred with no apparent economic justification between numbers of accounts and of legal entities. Also, in the other chain, where is less money involved, let's say less than 1 million euros, main actors are usually members of the criminal organization themselves. And from time to time, there is involvement of lawyers and other professionals could be noticed, but mainly they are doing by themselves, we could say locally. And cash-based transactions are very usual. A different structure of that cash-based transactions, and also structured cash deposits of unknown origin also is noticeable in this type. Also loans, cash gifts of unknown origin or from, let's say, relatives to natural and legal person are also very, very usual. So simulated legal transactions, same, but on a low level. But it is also notable there, especially in the last couple of years, Havala is also very usual in this type of transactions. And even it is usually connected with Arab countries, South Asia, China. This time the Balkan countries and especially Serbia is very, very affected. Nowadays could be seen also as a dominant type of transferring money between the members of the crime group connected with drugs locally and internationally.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Miroslava. So I want also to say thank you for the contributions in this report to my colleagues. They are Anesa Agovic in Bosnia and Herzegovina and Sasha Đorđević in Serbia and Montenegro. Thank you, Sasha and Anessa, for working in the field and also contributing a lot to this challenging report, I could say. Now we have 15 more minutes for today's webinar, and it's going to be dedicated finally to questions and answers. I have already gathered, I believe, all the questions that they were posed both in the Q&A chat and in the chat. So we have a question from Ron Bunyaku. I think this is the second question. And I think it's a question for Robin and Christina. You have listed illicit trade as one of the focus areas. Did you have explore the illicit trade of cultural goods in the region due to its geographic position? Serbia, Bosnia, and Montenegro are often transit countries with smugglers profiting from looted cultural goods.
I'm going to pass that one, if I may, to Christina. I'm not sure we did specifically look at cultural goods as part of the sort of illicit trading area. Did we, Christina?
No, exactly. Unfortunately, in this particular research, we didn't look at it more specifically.
No.
But this is quite interesting, in fact, because we might have also we might research the issue as well, and thank you very much for posing and raising this issue as well. So we have another question from Sinisha. I think it refers to your presentation again, and it's about in which industry workers are receiving money in cash.
Yeah, well, we heard that across most industries, actually. I mean, it seemed to be most prevalent amongst those who are, for example, receiving cash directly as part of payment. So, for example, taxi drivers were reported. But actually, in Bosnia, it was reported as being 50% of salaries generally across the board. I mean, that wouldn't be true necessarily of public officials, but certainly people in most trades were receiving certain element of their salary in cash. So it was pretty indiscriminate from our interviews.
Okay, we have another question. In fact, this is quite interesting one from Jay Albanese. He asks about to compare the reports from the report of August 2020 that the Global Initiative has analyzed the illicit financial flows in Albania, Kosovo, and North Macedonia with this one. And I think Christina might be in a better position to answer this question since she was author in both reports.
Sure. Thanks very much for the question. What we tried to do is use a similar methodology in both reports, looking at the components and at the channels of IFFs. But this time we were trying to make it much more specific and really follow the money and follow financial investigations. I think that some of the key findings are quite similar. The regional features that enable IFFs, large informal sectors, the cash-based economies, but then there are also key differences in each country, which I think are worth highlighting. Just one would be money laundering through the gambling sector, for example. While Albania and Kosovo introduced a gambling ban, I think it was in 2019, and that had sort of displaced some of the money laundering trends in these countries. Money laundering or gambling actually remains possible in the three countries we looked at this time. So there were key differences there. I think generally one issue that we see across the region is that there's very little data on IFFs, and both at the components and channels of IFFs. And that remained definitely true for the first report, but also for this one. And there's a clear need to improve the quality and the quantity of data on this issue. And we hope that we can continue researching this topic also on the way forward.
Thank you, Christina. We have also the question from Metodi from North Macedonia. The question is directed to all the authors and panelists as well. Do you think that organized crime is receiving geopolitical context? So this is the question. If some of you want to jump in.
Sorry, Vatina, could you repeat the question? Is it perceived?
Do you think that organized crime is receiving geopolitical context in this region? So maybe Metodi can very quickly take the floor and also explain us what is the question about, because I also have received some feedback that is a little bit unclear. Metodi, are you there? I don't know if Metodi is there.
Okay, can you hear?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, we can hear
Thank
you.
you very much. Well, I was resistant to the question, but I'm doing a research for with basically influence. What we found out that foreign influence enters pretty much through organized crime teams, and I would like to see, because you've mentioned that most of the problematic areas Russians companies. So basically, I was wondering, draw such type of connections, because there are also some other writings about Estonia smuggling cigarettes and about potential this type of activities in the Black Sea. Russians are trying to use criminal teams in order to basically install different activities that basically have a political connections. Okay.
Anybody?
Okay.
maybe we move on. So we have two questions about Bosnia. So the first, it comes from Vincent. In the case of Bosnia, given the current relative economic underdevelopment, high employment and corruption, as well as the high level of GNP dedicated to the public sector, has there been any effort to track the trends regarding the emergence or evolution of organized crime groups, internal and external, since the end of the war in 1995? And another question that also come regarding Bosnia: are there comprehensible data on money laundering in Republika Srpska? Are there control mechanisms equally throughout the whole region? If Senad or somebody else could, or Anessa.
Yeah.
Anessa.
Yeah. I think in terms of organized crime, we've been chronicling, the Global Initiative has been chronicling organized crime in Bosnia, and perhaps Agnesa can speak to that, or Christina can speak to that.
Thank you, Robin and Christina and Tatiana, for a great presentation and trying to share all, we can say, enormous insights what we deliver with this report. I have to say this work on the report was quite extensive and challenging, because it is really an issue to get people to work on the report and to people to really speak up. And that was quite an issue because Senad's example of whistleblowing, or at least speaking on openly, even with anonymous, we can say, protection, is really hard because the society, and I have to say relevant institutions, are not providing especially even for the journalists who are working on such cases. I have to say it has to be a courageous one. Speaking on the questions, I have to say that already Safed tried to respond to Vincent. As he said, we have security agencies who are delivering, we can say, in somewhat extent, serious results. But as Senad also mentioned, we have an issue on the judiciary, on the prosecutor office. We have not resolved important cases of high corruption, although we had so many affairs. Even, we can say, the head of intelligence and certain phone calls were, we can say, publicly spoken up, where people are speaking that high-level corruption are not being resolved cases, like intentionally, because we are, we can say, tapping into this tentacle of organized crime, which was, we have to say, mentioned a couple of times. So organized crime groups are having here, we can say, some of the foundations or even really important activities. Besides, I have to say, when we mentioned the state study case on Bosnia and Herzegovina, we focused also on civil society, which is important, where CSO space are being shrunk on many, we can say, research and results, but also on the other side, Bosnia and Herzegovina on Transparency International Index, as well on our global organized crime index, are really low. I have to say, like third in the Europe on corruption, organized crime, or least on the resilience, are somewhat very worrying results. And in the last 2 years, which was a recent data from Transparency International in our country, over 120 million km or 60 million euros were spent to civil society. And we can only imagine in what extent went to, we can say, to it, at least not so correct, I have to say, untransparent way, or supporting certain individuals, or in the end, political parties.
Thank you, Anessa. We have, in fact, one question on armed trafficking and how important this kind of like illicit market it is in this region. In fact, this is, in my knowledge, this is a topic that it was not mentioned in the report, but maybe one of the colleagues, maybe Sasha, you could give, like, I mean, a short overview over the arms smuggling in the region.
Yeah, thank you, Fatjona. So basically, in this report, we didn't tackle the issue of arms smuggling, and I'm not sure in this question is about legal or illegal. So, arms smuggling. Okay. So basically, the countries from are receiving the smuggled weapons are basically in the Middle East, more or less, and this is like one of the huge issue that actually is connected with the Germany and French approach, because some of the weapons from the ex-Yugoslavia actually pop up in the several terroristic attacks in the Western Europe. And right now there is one initiative that actually wants to tackle the issue of all small arms, but we actually didn't find out we didn't tackle the issue of arms smuggling. So, yeah.
Okay. So for any questions that you have, and it's not part of this report, please write to us, and we are going to kind of like link it and send you some reports, or maybe tell you if we ever have worked on the topic and what kind of like information do we have. I have a question about, I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. It's from Mariana Grasic, and it's about judicially and prosecution institution. And I think that if we have presented the kind of like findings to this institution, and what do you receive, if we receive any feedback from institutions? I know that the report has been also consulted with some institutions. Maybe somebody can say something more.
Yeah, and perhaps Christina could pick this up, because I know that GIZ, who are our sponsors, have been very good about encouraging us to reach out to the governments, and we have spoken to certain members of certain governments. It's not for me to say exactly who I've spoken to, because they might not wish to be mentioned on this call. But Christina, can we say a little bit more about that? We've certainly attempted to reach out to all three governments in different contexts.
Yes, exactly. So we've reached out to representatives in different institutions in all three countries, with both the English, with especially the English version of the report. We've also held government briefings and received feedback from 2 of the 3 countries that we looked at, and incorporated some of their feedback into the final version of the report. I've also seen that there were some questions on the final English version of the report. I will repost that into the chat. It is available at the Global Initiatives website. Finally, I just want to say that this is a civil society-led research with inputs from experts really across the region. As Robin explained up front, also on the methodology, we relied a lot on interviews with experts from civil society, but also from government and the private sector.
Okay. Thank you, Christina. I think we have from Ivica a question on Open Balkans, and which envisions the Balkans without border. And so it's going to raise, as I understand, the volume of illicit financial flows. I mean, in fact, Ivica, all the countries that we analyze, they are not part of the Open Balkan yet, but if somebody has some idea, if one of these countries could, is Serbia, sorry, Serbia is one of the main, but Montenegro and then Bosnia, no. But Sasha, maybe this goes to you, like, I mean, do you think that Serbia, North Macedonia and Albania, besides the good things that Open Balkans bring, do you think that also is this kind of like risk of raising the volumes of illicit financial flows and illegal activities in general?
Yes, I think we actually published one article in our risk bulletin on the Open Balkan and risk on organized crime. So I think because when you open the borders without any technical checks on the borderline, so there is like a greater risk for organized crime activities. And in the context of Open Balkans, so basically, if some illicit good pop up in the Dures, it can easily go out to the Hungary, and basically depending on the border control and the border corruption risk, it can easily go to the European Union member states. So this is one of the issues that is, I think, in my opinion, is completely neglected in the public discourse, but there are organized crime risks, and we can see that from the European Union member state practice when they actually, because of the Schengen and the Justice and Home Affairs Cooperation, they completely develop the new legal framework and the new area of justice, freedom, and security, actually to target the issue of organized crime, especially because of the less control on the borders.
Thank you, Sasha. Unfortunately, we are coming to an end to this webinar today. Thank you very much to all the panelists for their contribution, and also to our guests for their attention, and also because they were quite active with their questions. And really, I have enjoyed this very much, and I hope also other panelists as well. We hope to carry on the work in further exploring illicit financial flows in this region, and I hope that we are going to gather again in similar events.